Hi, everybody. My name is Girija, and hope everybody is having a good morning. I'm a senior program manager in the Lync server platform team. I'm here with Albert Koyman, who's a senior product marketing manager in the same team. I hope some of you had attended his session yesterday where he kind of gave you a glimpse of all the platform APIs that are available with Lync Server 2013. And he also gave you a sneak preview of what we call the Unified Communications Web API, or UCWeb for short. Today, we'll be doing a deep dive on this specific API and see what scenarios and features are possible with this.
How many of you actually have worked with the UCWeb API? One person.
Okay, that's good. So hopefully it will be interesting for you, and you'll get to know how you can build your apps using this API. So with that, let's quickly go over what we are planning to cover in this session. So first is we'll give a brief overview of what is this UCWeb API, and as well as why we came up with this one, what are the high-level goals, and what are the scenarios or the features that are available with this. And then we'll go into a high-level architecture or go over the various components that are involved in building your apps against this API, and also understand some of the key design principles. After that, we'll go walk you through the process of actually building your web app when you start developing your scenarios. And lastly, I'll cover some of the key programming concepts that you should be aware of when you're programming against this.
How many people of you actually did attend the session yesterday?
Oh.
Okay, that's not that many. So let me actually repeat one thing that I explained there before we actually go into detail. So here we actually going more in detail about this UCWeb API. And what I explained yesterday is that when you are looking at this whole session, what is absolutely key is to understand that we are essentially, as Microsoft, in this transformation from .NET APIs into essentially wrapping the whole what we had in SIP into HTTP. So in this session, you will find a lot of explanation about how we were able to do real-time communications over HTTP. So just for your expectations, for your level setting, let's continue.
All right, thanks, Albert. So like he mentioned, one of our key goals when designing this API was to enable this scenario where you can embed UC in almost any application. And in order to do that, what it really means is that we have to support cross-browser, cross-platform, cross-devices, so that you can go build and embed this UC functionality into any app or any scenario that you can think of. And this also means that we have to appeal to the broader web developer or the mobile developer community, which is the growing community these days. And in order to do that, we had to make sure that we also adopt some of the key design principles that the web developers are familiar with, such as REST or JSON or HTTP. And that you will see that theme throughout the design of this web API. So this basically is a view of the various flavors of Lync, that is, Lync clients that are available. These are built out by Microsoft. So on one side, you will see the Lync on PC and Mac. And on the other side, you will have basically the Lync on your smartphones, such as iPhone, Android, or Windows Phone devices. And then you have the Lync on your the iPad type of form factor, as well as the last one, which is the meetings experience on the Lync web app, which is completely a browser-based application. The interesting point to note here is that 3 out of these 4 or 5 form factors are actually powered using the same UC Web API. And one of the reasons for that was that we wanted to enable this consistent experience across our different clients and enable a rapid pace of development so that we can innovate faster. And we've been able to achieve a lot of that by using this API. So we have features ranging from IAM, presence, or contacts, to sharing your application sharing or collaboration scenarios, which you'll see heavily in our Lync web app client, as well as the multi-view video or P2P audio-video sessions over VoIP.
And one of the important things is that many people, when you talk about a web API, always associate with you can only do this in the browser. However, and you corrected me there actually to a certain extent, this is a RESTful API, and of course this RESTful API can therefore also be wrapped in Objective-C or Java, and therefore be literally cross-platform and cross-language. What goes over the wire is still this hypermedia plus HTTP, but the actual coding on your client side can be in any language.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. With that, we'll actually go and see what is the various apps that we have available. I'll start with Albert's demo, which we kind of left off yesterday, and with the HelaCab demo you want to start.
Okay, so let me first switch to my computer. So I said we currently have a lot of APIs very much focused around .NET. So when we started moving to Windows 8 and to the modern experience, one of the things that we are running into is, of course, the .NET and modern and all this that is not really super fit. So in this particular demo, we have made a demo for cab drivers. And this cab driver application runs on a slate. It's mounted on the dashboard. And it is looking essentially for customers nearby. So you can see here a mashup of essentially the Bing APIs with our UC Web API. To show that this is UC Web is, for example, if you look at here you can set it to, if you want to set yourself to taking a break, you can set the status to away. That's what you know in Lync as away, or you can set yourself to available. I showed this yesterday very briefly as well. And the moment that I actually am a customer, let me actually start here. At this moment, I actually can log in as a customer with my live ID. It's not necessary, but we would love to actually identify who is the person who is hailing a cab. And I actually can give my live ID password. With this, I actually sign in and I do some type of auth in which I effectively take out some tokens, and we'll come back to that in a moment. And this can be, for example, a browser-based application on a on a mobile phone. And here, this customer can then specify, again using the Bing APIs, that, for example, the person would like to go to the New Orleans airport. The moment that I press this hail a cab, there is effectively a request made to the drivers. So if I go back to the driver's side, in this driver's side, you actually will find that there is a customer, Albert Koyman, that data comes from my live ID, and that I actually can accept to take this ride from where I am, and it will say your driver will arrive in a moment. Here on the client side, I actually can say, yes, I would like to be picked up by this driver, and at this very moment, I am in connection in a session powered by UC Web API. You can see here the little icon come up, and it says, hey, your driver will arrive in a few minutes. Of course, you don't want to have the driver start typing away on their tablet while they're driving to you, so we made some pre-canned responses, like, for example, give me 5 more minutes, and then the customer will see actually that, and the customer, of course, can type, okay. And you are back and forth in an IM session, and the driver can say, okay, hey, I am here, so, and then you are there. Now, and then, of course, you can end the ride, and all the stuff is there. So this is essentially an incarnation of that same UC Web API as a modern app, as well as a browser-based application for instant messaging and presence. I hand it back to you.
Sure. So let's actually take a look at some of the other apps that are available. I'll start off with... So this is our Lync mobile client on iPhone. Basically, like you can see that I have... let me see. Okay, so you can see that you have my name, my availability, the green icon. I think it's not very clear, but basically I can go change my status, etc. And then there is this full contacts experience that you can get about each and every, various my buddy lists, my favorites, and their specific photos, etc. And then there is the chats experience. I have a bunch of IM conversations that were going on, so I have a quick view of that. But what I wanted to show is basically the meetings experience. So here I have my daily recurring meeting, the stand-up meeting that I generally attend. And I can quickly go into this app and join this meeting from here. So what this happens is that it launches, connects to my Lync server and makes sure that I get into this meeting, and by default, I am joined as muted. In this case, there are already 3 participants that are there, and I can immediately start my video. So there you go. I have my video. Albert? Oh, okay.
I have my video as well.
Yeah, so, but the network has probably like poor, and that's the reason why I'm not getting his side of the video, because it's possible that we have been having a lot of network issues since yesterday. So, but generally, like if Albert's video was coming through, you will see his as well as mine. That is the preview section that is there. Let's actually move on to the iPad scenario as well. Yeah, so this is the same client on an iPad device. As you have a similar experience except for the iPad form factor. You have my presence as well as the contacts experience, the conversations, and similarly you have the meetings experience. But in this case, instead of actually going to my meetings experience, I can easily rejoin into this meeting from here. So actually the video showed up of Albert after a few bits. All right, so let's see if I can mute so that, yeah, so the interesting part here is that in addition to the video, I actually have a sharing session that I can view on my iPad device. So Albert is actually sharing his screen, and I can easily get a view of that on my screen here. In addition to, the same app is actually also available on my, I can join to the same one through my web browser here. So I have the same meeting ongoing here. As you can see, I have the multi-view video, Albert's video, as well as the video coming in from my iPhone, as well as I have the screen sharing session going on. I'm currently joined in here as a guest user and anonymous user, but I can easily be promoted to maybe to be a presenter, and then I can do all the features of sharing my screen or sharing a PowerPoint or starting a whiteboard session. So this basically gives you an idea of the type of features that are possible using the UCIVA Web API. In today's session, we'll primarily delve into the public API set that is available for third-party development. So let's get back to my presentation here. So what is UCIVA? So like we already mentioned, this is a web API which is specifically meant to cater to the mobile and web devices. So earlier we had a great story with our enterprise developer with our UCMA API, and we wanted to extend the same story to our mobile and web developers, and that's the reason why we came up with this API. This particular slide calls out the various APIs that are available. So at the very bottom, you have the Lync server core, and we have an API called the Lync server API, and this primarily is a kind of a proxy API where you can intercept the zip level messages and do your scripts, write scripts around it, like for archiving or compliance reasons. And built on top of that is the UCMA API, which actually is a rich set of API written in managed platform. And this basically enables you to write more complex type of scenarios like a contact center or an IVR-based application. The UC Web API that you see is primarily built on top of UCMA, and it enables a lot of end user or client type of scenarios and is highly optimized for your mobile and web development scenarios.
Can you give me some examples actually why it's optimized for mobile and web?
So actually we'll go deep into some of those things, like basically a quick example would be like event aggregation. Like we want to make sure that battery is optimized and bandwidth is optimized. We don't wake up your app multiple times. And then there are other concepts around ensuring the forward-backward compatibility with apps. But we'll talk more about it. So how is UCIVA language independent? Like Albert mentioned, this is all based upon HTTP concepts. So if you have any language that can talk HTTP or has an HTTP stack, can send, receive messages, receive requests and responses in HTTP, you can write a program against this API. So this can range from your Objective-C on an iPad or an iPhone device to the web-friendly languages such as Ruby or JavaScript, etc. So what's in the roadmap? So basically, like at the very bottom level is the Lync server RTM, which we released around 6-7 months ago last year. And this saw the birth of the very first UCIVA app, which is the Lync web app, the meetings experience that we just saw. And it enables a bunch of scenarios for anonymous user as well as an authenticated user where you can join in a meeting, do sharing and collaboration. The next was a CU update, which we released in February. With this, we also released our public API for UCIVA to enable a bunch of scenarios around contacts, presence, IM, as well as scheduling and joining your online meeting. We also enabled anonymous chat scenarios, basically, with this release. And it also saw the release of all the mobile clients with the rich API set for voice, video, as well as the sharing sessions. What's in the future? Well, first is to make this API available in Office 365, and obviously we are looking at how we can bring the rich functionality to the same API for our web developers as well. So what are some of the key scenarios that you can build? So the first and foremost is around building an anonymous web chat experience. This is actually what Albert already demoed in his HelaCab. The customer who was actually signed in using LiveID was truly an anonymous user from a Lync perspective. Like the customer was signed in for LiveID, you may or may not sign in. It was primarily for tracking as well as billing and all that. But the user could have been truly anonymous from a Lync point of view. And the second one is embedding UC in your line of business application. So you may want to include it as part of your CRM or any type of scenarios that you have. And the last is around lighting up the contacts and presence experience on any device and platform of your choice. All right, so with that, let's actually switch to a quick demo of our new website. So let me stop my... All right, some of you may have already seen this because Albert demoed it yesterday, but the ucivalync.com is your go-to place for anything related to this API. You have a lot of references here about the API set, as well as some of the demos and samples available here. Let's see if it comes up. Yeah, the network has been slow, and as the day progresses, more and more people start joining in. Maybe I'll just...
Shall we try my computer?
Sure. Maybe I'll just disable my wireless.
Okay, I'm in business. All right, you can use this computer.
All right, so here we have the interactive demo that is...
The buttons do only work on the top.
Oh, okay. There you go. I totally lost. Oh, I need to sign in here. So let's go ahead and sign in.
The reason why we have this EULA is because essentially there are about 1,500 people that can simultaneously do this demo, and you are essentially able to contact everyone who is online at the same time as you. So once people start talking nasty to each other, we need to say that Microsoft is not responsible for that.
All right, so here we have the interactive demo. Basically, like this demo is meant to give you a preview of what the various API calls are. These 3 contacts are available to you for using their authentication and the tokens that will be available with each of these contacts, and try out some of the scenarios. So let's go ahead and continue. So here Amy is basically like one of the users, and let's go ahead and change her presence to maybe from available to say busy, and say, hey, I'm demoing right now. So, and what you see down here is basically like the actual messages that are sent. I mean, this is an interpretation in curl, which is a language-independent web request tool. So you can see here that I'm actually sending the message I am demoing as part of the note update to the UC Web API. And so in addition to this, I can obviously start taking a view of what my contacts are, like what their presence looks like. So if I change my presence from busy to say to be right back or away, this presence changes here, and also you will see that the presence would change in a bit on the Fernando side to away, so who is subscribing to Amy's presence. And let's go ahead and do an IM session similarly. So Amy was chatting with Sarah. Hey, got a minute? And so what you see here is actually a post message to our UC API, which is like you do a post to the messaging, and you actually send the message in terms of like, hey, got a minute, and then the text is received on the other side by Sarah. So basically, this just gives you a preview of what is really possible with this API. Let's come back to our presentation. Back here. All right, so before we delve into the architecture, I'd like to ask if there are any questions folks have.
Yeah, I have a question. Let's say that I had a WebEx meeting with 50 people and I wanted to join to a Lync meeting. Is this something I would use for that, or is there better optimal integration?
There's no integration. So
Yeah.
So in that sense, like the whole experience that you have in this UC Web API is all centered around Lync. If we are talking about bringing different systems together, you actually will need to use, on the IM level only, the federation spec that we have published. If you would like to bring in endpoints around video, you have to use transcoders, like they are available from different parties. But when it comes to meetings, there's literally nothing. And the reason for that is actually pretty simple, because there are no standards, essentially. So in that sense, it is not possible to bring them together. Now, there are people who are doing some video mixing. They essentially translate a meeting into a video, and then they are mixing the video signal. But in this particular case, there's no hope.
Yeah. I'm not getting network connectivity. Right. Can I switch your wire to this one?
Yep.
All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that, because my next set of demos will not work. Yeah, slow. Okay. It's working, but it's slow.
That line actually goes to our server back in the server room.
All right, so let's go into the UCWA architecture while my machine hopefully connects. So what were some of the design considerations while we developed this API? We've talked a lot about being cross-platform and having a broader reach to our web developers using the RESTful concepts as well as HTTP, JSON, etc. Let me briefly spend more time about the other 2 concepts, which is around backwards and forwards compatibility. So what we've observed is, like, with the advent of new mobile devices and as well as the number of apps, people have this tendency to actually keep upgrading their apps at a very frequent pace. I mean, there is a sense of fear, basically a fearless upgrade kind of a thing. And what this means is that we have to be in a place where the users, when they upgrade their app, are no longer affected by which server version is actually they're connecting to. So irrespective of which server version they connect to, their app should continue to work. Maybe the set of features that will be available to their app would be limited based upon the server version, but it should not be a limiting factor for them from upgrading their app. Similarly, like when you go to the services model, you see that we want to push out updates in Office 365 for our Lync server component at a very frequent pace. So we also have a situation where the server may be at a newer version, where the apps and all may be still at an older version. The way we ensure that the backwards-forwards compatibility is actually maintained is by introducing a concept called hypermedia. What this basically means is that the client no longer makes any assumptions about what is the state, or basically it doesn't make any assumption about what functionalities it can actually do. Instead, it relies on the server to tell it by discovering and navigating a graph of features and figuring out as it goes along that, okay, this feature is available for me versus not. So what this allows is that both the server and the client can evolve independently without affecting backwards-forwards compatibility. The next one is around the real-time notifications and aggregation. This is basically to ensure that we send our updates in a real-time fashion. So when you have that incoming IM invite coming in for you, you want that IM invite to come in immediately. Whereas you also have a bunch of presence updates that keep happening, and you do not want to wake up your mobile device or even your web app, for that matter, to send these updates very frequently. So we introduced a concept called prioritizing our events as well as aggregating them. What prioritization means is that your highest priority or the real-time updates like the incoming call or the incoming IM would be sent almost immediately to you, whereas some of the other low priority events like presence would take some more time. You actually as developers have control over this, so these are configurable into different buckets of real-time versus high, medium, low, and you can set the amount of time you want it to aggregate over. And the other concept is aggregation, which basically means is that if an event is about to go, like the server aggregates a bunch of medium, low events over a period of time, and if a high-pri real-time update comes along, then it would basically release all the events that it has aggregated over a period of time along with the same event, because that avoids another round trip that can happen from the client to the server. So that's one of the ways where we do optimizations for our mobile devices. This is basically a view of how you would build your unified communications on HTTP. On one side, you have your awesomesite.com, where you would be hosting your particular app. On the other side is contoso.com, which has the deployment for the Lync server, maybe on-premise. The app itself is basically consists of two things, which is one is your specific application layer logic, which is running in the browser in this example, and a bunch of UCIVA helper libraries that we provide, and you're free to use them. These are JavaScript libraries which help you with kickstarting your app, doing some of the common functions that almost every web developer would have to write in terms of like caching or authentication or authorization. All those things we provide you out of box. And the other side is the Lync server, home server view, which has a bunch of components. The most relevant ones are the UCIVA and the Discover component here. Let's actually walk through a scenario of how your app would interact with UCIVA. The very first process would be connecting to the Auto Discover API, which would be a linkdiscover.internal.com. And then once the Discover API, the request hits the Discover API, what gets downloaded onto your app is this cross-domain frame. So what is this cross-domain frame? Basically, like a lot of browsers restrict the apps, if they are from a different domain, from making any requests. This is primarily from a security point of view. You do not want any random JavaScript to run on your server. So that's the reason why a lot of browsers have the same origin policy, because of which any other app is restricted from running. However, in HTML5, cross-domain is actually enabled in a secure fashion through the post-message concept. And what this allows is that you as an admin now would have to say that I actually trust this set of domains. And then if that is the case, then a cross-domain iframe, which is actually provided by UCIVA, gets downloaded into your app, and you need to include it as part of your app. And any subsequent messages would actually go from your app to this cross-domain iframe through the post message and onto the Discover or the UCIVA API.
So what is absolutely critical there is that if you are on an admin of that particular server of Lync, that you actually, of course, define then which sites can actually be in that cross-domain.
Yes, yeah.
So many people who are starting with these helper libraries, they tried, for example, to set it at their own port, set it at their own domain, et cetera, and that doesn't work. Only in the helper libraries typically works localhost, because that is what is activated on our particular server.
Yeah, he's basically talking about the sandbox environment that we have provided at uciva.com. And like I said, an admin needs to enable some of these domains, and we have enabled the localhost by default. And the next step is around authentication. So once the client actually connects, it asks for authentication, and we support various types of authentication, whether it's IWA basic or passive auth. And what you get returned with is an OAuth token, and you need to supply this OAuth token with each of your web requests that you make subsequently. The Discover component basically gives you the full FQDN of the UCIVA endpoint, so every user is actually home to a front end. So the Discover component would give you which front end you actually need to go connect to. Once you have that FQDN for UCIVA, you connect directly to UCIVA through the REST API for making any kind of calls, like whether it is setting your presence, retrieving contacts, or making initiating your IM conversation. What I also talked, and these are actually further translated from HTTP to SIP through UCMA, and the remote client actually starts receiving those SIP messages. What I also talked about is the real-time updates. So like I said, we have the need to also send or push these events to the client. So the way we do it is also we maintain a separate channel, which is called the event channel, which is where the client is actually responsible for placing a hanging or a pending get with the server. And anytime we have these events, we actually push or release this channel so that the events are sent back to the client. Yes? SignalR is not being used currently. This was a technology which has been in the making for some time for us. So at the time we were looking at it, SignalR was still new. But that's something we can surely look for in the future. So what's the UCIVA part of it is basically, like I said, we have the command channel, and then we have the event channel. The command channel is basically making any type of HTTP request, such as get, post, delete, and or put operations. And the event channel is basically a pending get that the client maintains with the server, which we use to push out any kind of real-time updates that happen on the server side to the client. So the UCIVA API itself is basically combines these two channels as well as any data that goes across between the two. That constitutes the UCIVA API. The resources are basically a snapshot of the feature set that is available on the server for you, and you can do these basically create, read, update, or delete operations on these resources to do your operations. On your app side, like I said, we have helper libraries that are available, which you can use to connect to these to this API, and that's pretty much it. So I think I covered a lot about the events itself. Some of the things that you may want to understand is basically like what is the response structure itself looks like. So the response structure consists of a self link. This is the link to the events resource itself, as well as the next link, which is the client basically parks a pending get. So once the event channel request is released by the server, the client needs to come back and place another request with the event channel, and this next link is used for that purpose. The sender array is basically each event belongs to a sender. So I, as a sender, could be contacts, could be one sender, communication could be one sender. Like, basically, these are all the events that are related. They are bundled together and are assigned to a sender. So this is basically a representation of that array. And apart from that, we already spoke about the prioritization of urgent updates as well as aggregation. In addition to this, we also have a concept called synchronization or resume. Basically, what this allows is that if a client comes out of turn, like for example, the client lost track or lost connectivity, as a result of which it came with a wrong ACK number or came to an older request. In that case, the server would return back and say that, hey, you need to resync your client. And this generally happens during development time and may not really be happening in because it's really a bug on the client side that can happen. In that case, the client is told that, hey, you need to resync your state and go back and resume your cycle. The other scenario that can happen is if the client has lost connectivity and has not come back for a while, then the server does have a timeout period after which it goes up and cleans up the resources. And when it does that, the client would actually receive a bunch of events saying that, hey, your conversation was deleted, your app was deleted, your presence and all those were deleted. But if for some reason the client failed to receive that, then again, it will be sent a resume link, which is an indication to the client saying that, hey, you need to resume or resurrect your state. Yeah, so this basically is the view of what, as an IT admin, you need to do. So like we talked about the cross-domain scripting that the admin needs to enable. So if you have your awesomesite.com, then as an IT admin, I need to go in Contoso and say that I need to allow this particular domain to start making calls into my deployment here. And if the domain does not belong to, if it's not been configured properly, then the samples will actually throw you an error saying that this service does not allow cross-domain scripts connecting to this. All right, so with that, let's see if my connectivity is back, and we can look at the API itself. All right, so here we have a bunch of documentation around the API. The API reference is actually something which you may want to look at, and it has a view of, but it has like information around what are the errors, what are the specific reference libraries, and also the information about the UCIVA helper library that we talked about. In addition, there is something called a dynamic API graph view. Like I said, the client actually doesn't make any assumptions about its functionality. Instead, it navigates a graph. So this is actually a visual view of that same graph for you so that you can understand how the API flows look like. So the very first basic level is the user, and then user is associated with a bunch of applications. Like you can have an iPad application, or you can have a Windows 8 application that you can that are associated with this particular user. The application is a view of that specific app that you're building. And if you drill down into this app, you get a dashboard view of what are the basic functionalities that you can do. The batch operation is something I'll talk about later. A communication is basically where you go do all your IAM or your call control type of scenarios. Events is another way, mainly initiating the event channel and start receiving those events. Me is a representation of myself, so any data associated with me around presence, my phone information, or whether it is my contact display name or my note, all that will be available under this me resource. Online meetings is mainly for scheduling your online meetings or creating online meetings. And people is, again, a view of your buddy list and their specific contact information. You can drill down. Policies are any specific policies that the admin has set for you. So we push some of the relevant policies down to you. Not all policies that are available in Lync servers will come as part of policies. We actually have two concepts here. One is policies that are actually consumed by the UCIVA itself, and these are exposed not in the form of the raw data, but they are actually exposed in the form of features or capabilities that may or may not be available to you depending upon what the policy is. For example, if the admin doesn't want you to allow you to make a PSTN call, then that link will not be available to you in the graph. However, there could be other policies which are really relevant to you as a client, but the server has no control over interpreting. Those could be examples around logging or things like that. In those cases, we send those policies down to the client directly. Let's actually drill down into the me resource, how it looks like. So under me, like I said, you have a concept like you can get your location, you can get your photo, you can get your presence, and you can report my activities basically to say that, hey, I am available, I am inactive right now. It keeps track of how your presence state changes. If you come down, you will see that all these properties are actually available in the form of, so a me resource itself consists of three things. One is a set of properties that defines the state of that resource. In this case, you have a department, email address, name, title, or URI. And then a bunch of links. These are nothing but links to some related resources. So when you are actually looking at the me resource, you may not be interested in fetching the call forwarding settings for this user. So especially when you are seeing the Lync desktop UI or Lync client UI, you see that there is my photo, my presence, my name, but call forwardings is something that I'm really not interested in showing immediately. So that's the reason why it's actually available as a link. You as a client can choose to download that information when that view is brought up. In addition, we also have a concept called the embedded resource. In this particular example, I don't have one, but an embedded resource would be like a resource which is related to me. And in UCIVA, we actually felt that when you fetch this me resource, it makes sense that you would also need immediate access to this. For example, in an incoming IM invite, when you get that invitation, it makes sense for us to send you that contact information right away, because we know that the first thing you will display in the toast is the user who is trying to reach you. So in order to enable that scenario, we actually embed the same contact resource as part of the me resource, as part of the invitation itself, so that you don't have to go fetch this again from the server. So let's switch back to the presentation itself. Yeah, so this is the snapshot view of what I said was an embedded resource. So if you had an embedded resource, you would have the information about that resource itself, and then a set of collections of links to related resources, and a property bag information, which is just giving you the state of that resource in one snapshot. All right, so building your UCIVA app. Again, I need to switch back. Yeah. All right, so the way you would build your app is you would go to the uciva.com, and you would most likely go and say, I want to get started. The first steps that you would be asked to do is like you would go ahead and download your helper libraries. If you click that, you will be asked to go ahead and save those. And you can extract these samples out. I actually already have saved these samples out in my folder, because the very next step that is asked is configuring your web server, such as IIS, on your local machine. So you can easily set this up from your Windows component. Just select that component and say that I want to enable IIS. And once you do that, so I can show you that on my IIS here, I have the same set of samples that are saved. Hold on.
It's actually on the iNet.
Oh, yeah.
In the root.
Sorry.
INetPub.
Oh, yeah, sorry, thanks. Yeah, so I have my demo saved here, which is the samples here. So I'll just go ahead and launch this from my
Like
side.
I said, don't try to change the port, etc., because otherwise you will need to change that in the code as well. It's only accepting port 80.
Yes, so here you have, I'll also open another one. So you have two options here. Like basically you can connect these samples to your own topology if you have a topology that is running, or you can go ahead and connect to the developer sandbox. And the way to connect to the developer sandbox would be that when you sign into the usiva.com, you are actually, with your live ID, you are given a set of credentials that I had talked about for those three buddies. So what they have shared is their auth tokens. And you can easily go say that domain is got.uc.net. So if you see the steps here, basically it says that extract these files and then go ahead. These are the credentials. In order to run these credentials, it says that, hey, enter the domain name got.uc.net and copy this token into your browser here. So I'll go ahead and do that. What this does is that it signs me on behalf of Amy, and I have basically my samples now running against the sandbox environment. The modules that I had talked about are available to you. So this is the cache or the transport auto discovery type of modules. These are modules that are available which do the common functionality that everybody would need to write. If you want to do a deep dive of what this specific API calls and the modules and all are, my colleague Alex Edelsberg had done a talk on Channel 9, so feel free to go and check that out later. It has a section which talks about the specific API calls about these modules. And so let's look at how the Me dashboard would look like. So here I have the various options here to set my presence or this, as well as get it. Here I can go ahead and say, hey, get my presence in me. Right now I'm online. I can see the code here to do that, which basically says that, hey, handle my get presence when I get it, and then in case of it also looks for any events, in which case it's changing. In addition, I can go ahead and say, hey, I'm actually away right now, so I'll just go ahead and set my presence to away. And so you can see that we can easily do a lot of these actions. I have a slide which walks you through the specific API calls. Let's do an IAM scenario, and in this case, I'm also show how you connect to your own topology. So I have a user already logged into my Lync desktop client. I log in as the other user here. On my sample app. And then here you can see that I can start my outgoing conversation with Lync and say start outgoing. It will show a toast on my Lync desktop, which I can say, hey, go ahead and accept. And then when I send a message, I receive it here, and I can send it back. And there you go, it gets updated. So let's actually walk through the flow of these events in the slide deck of how the IAM message would actually go. So the get presence. So the get presence is basically a request. So the presence is a resource representation, like out of your Me resource. And when you are making a call to the presence, you would just say, get my presence, and that would return to the link that is available to you. And the response that you get, you can see that availability is returned as online in terms of properties here. And the link is also available, which is the self link, the link to the presence resource itself. So it's as simple as that. And setting your presence, again, is a post operation on the same resource presence. And here you will send the property in the form of the request body in this example where we have said availability is equal to away. And once the server receives it, it sends back a response with a 204 no content because there's nothing really to send back. The presence has been updated appropriately. The next example is around your sending your IM. This is a bit more complicated. The starting of an IM message actually happens from the communications resource. Under communication, you have something called start messaging as a resource that is available to you. So when you do a post on that start messaging, that's how you start your IM conversation. There are some properties that you may want to specify when you're starting your IM conversation in terms of, like, say, setting the subject, setting the priority of the IM message in terms of importance, and to whom you are sending this IM message to. In addition, actually, what you have is an operation ID. And this is actually an interesting concept because we have all the updates coming in on the event channel. And then the events are really like, because a specific resource such as a messaging invitation could cause a multiple set of events. And you need this ability to correlate the request that you started here with the bunch of events that are coming on the event channel. So the way you correlate them is by using this operation ID, which the client actually specifies. In this case, I have specified the operation ID to be a GUID. And once I send the post message, what I'm returned is the link to a messaging invitation. A messaging invitation is created on my behalf on the server, and this is a long-running operation. So I have to keep track of how the invitation is progressing through my event channel updates that come in later. So that's the reason why I start my connection to the event channel. And once I have that, in the terms of events, you will see that the update for a messaging invitation is received there. And I have the operation ID, which tells me this is the event that is actually related to my initial request. And it also returns me the status of that event invitation, which is right now, it is started right now. Once the other participant actually accepts that invitation, then that event update goes from started to actually completed in this case. And in addition, I also get this embedded resource, which I had talked about, which gives me an information about the remote participant who has accepted. Because in some cases, if it's a call, it's possible that I called you, but the call was truly accepted by somebody else because the call got forwarded. So in that case, this information could change. So that's the reason why we want to send that accepted by as part of the embedded resource. In addition, I also have links to say, hey, stop this if I want to end the conversation, or if I want to send more messages on that conversation, then I have links to do that. And basically, messaging is that link to send more conversations. So the next step that I would do is post a request on that messaging resource. And I say here, hello from the browser. And once that is done, I would I keep clicking on the other side. Yeah, I would get a 200 OKs with the message resource itself. The message also is an operation, so basically it would be a long-running thing that you would keep track of through the event channel, so it's also associated with an operation ID and all. With that, I'll spend the rest of the talk going over some of the concepts. If you have questions, feel free to ask now, or we can take it again in the end as well. Integer representation, so it is a property that you would get. It's not... Okay,
so that's not the whole thing that we would get back?
But in the essence of like the color that you have of the bar, of the green and the red, etc., that's a GIF file that we actually set ourselves, so I can make it any color.
I think what he wants to know is, do we return the availability number associated with, because like the availability is a range. It's not only the thing, it's a range. Do we actually send the availability number?
I understand.
I believe that we should be sending that because it is useful in some concepts, but Yeah, but it's surely
I
not
believe in the
shown in
public
this
API,
particular
actually,
example.
the custom presence is not available.
Custom presence is not available, but even if I set I'm available, I could be in a range of 2,500 to some 2,000.
And just for all the people who are not aware of what we are talking about. So what you have to understand is that the presence schema is actually a schema in itself. So although it is in Lync typically represented as available, busy, and away, and do not disturb, there are a lot of custom presence states that you can have, like, for example, in a meeting or in a call.
Yes.
And all those are associated with a specific number. And those numbers are either predefined by us or can be defined by the programmer themselves. So you can create your own custom presence states.
I see. So yeah, it's
and
possible.
Then the custom presence states, they are actually
not supported right now. Yes,
they are not supported at this point in time.
Yes, yes. So so in that means that the number itself is not interesting right now, at least from interesting from our point of view to make it available immediately. But in future, we do plan to enable the custom presence scenarios. We would show the custom presence, though. It's basically the setting of the custom presence that we don't support today.
Right. So my question is, how if the custom text if it's custom, how do I know what color to draw next to the picture?
Okay, and now coming back to the color. The color is not defined by us. The color is defined by you as the implementer of the actual person who writes the graphics. So, for example, in my taxi cab, when I built the cab, I took one random yellow, red, and green that I actually used to represent, and then and you don't need to parse out the text. You just take one of the things that is associated with those main present states that you can get in that drop-down. So be right back is literally in English is be right back all written together, and that's the state on which you can actually in your code react and then decide which color you're going to display as the actual color of your presence representation next to the icon. So if you pop up this this Lync client, right? What we are talking about. I'm not talking to the right computer, but we are talking about this yellow here that is in front of the actual picture, and that is not actually defined by us. It will be. It will be. Let's be very clear, because we would love to have the same color be used by everyone, so that people will recognize this is Lync. But at this very moment, it's not.
Yeah. Right. Go back. Any other question? Yeah.
You're saying that the custom availability or statuses such as in a call and in a meeting, those are custom, those are not?
So when we are talking about custom present states, there are custom present states that are defined or definable by the people who are doing the programming themselves. Like, for example, if you're in a contact center, you can say available for IM or available for this queue. What we were saying is that the ones that are not defined by us in Lync server, those are not transmitted. Everything that is defined in Lync server, like in a call is defined, or in an online meeting or Lync meeting as it's called nowadays, those are actually they do come through. And they are coming through as a string at this point in time and not as a number. And that string essentially is a continuous string of characters. And you need to translate that into whatever is the language that you would like to actually represent that.
All right, so with that, let's go into the concepts. Like I said, these concepts are also were talked about as part of the modules in the Channel 9 talk. If you're interested more in the modules, then you should go listen to that one. At a high level, we have these concepts. I've skipped the cross-domain and the events because we extensively talked about it already. The UCIVA helper libraries allow you to handle these programming concepts in an easy fashion, so within your web apps. The first concept is around HTTP. Basically, what this one talks about is that we use HTTP as an application level protocol and not as a transport. HTTP provides a bunch of methods that you can do. We have chosen a small subset which are relevant to our API and our scenarios, and these include basically the post get operation or the put or the delete, which correspond very nicely on a one-on-one basis to the create, update, get and delete operations that are available, that are easily possible on the resources. In addition, the next one is around hypermedia. The hypermedia is the concept which allows you to, as a client, to dynamically discover by navigating a graph about what all the features that are available to me. And instead of making any prior assumptions about the functionality that can be made available. And this functionality can change over time. So like it could be because the server went through an upgrade and you have an older client, or it could be because the policy or the admin has said that, hey, I do not want to make this feature available to my user, in which case the client would easily navigate and realize that I got this new feature that became available to me, or this feature is no longer available. So the client can drive its UI or its functionality based upon what links are available or not. And this totally abstracts away the tight coupling between the client and server that was common before.
And therefore, you actually, as a programmer, of course, you need to anticipate that you every time do need to take a look at what is actually coming back from the server.
Yes.
Because you cannot anticipate or you cannot take shortcuts. You literally have to be in this constant dialogue with the server to say, okay, hey, this particular user, what can you offer me? Yeah. And once it's offered, then you can actually start using it in the continuation.
Yes. Yes, and this can actually change based upon context as well. Like, for example, if you have already started a conversation, then you started a call, then you cannot start another call in the same conversation. So things like that can dynamically change even within the same, even if you can do certain actions based upon your current context, also this can change. So that's the reason why we highly recommend that as an app developer, you shouldn't make any assumption about the functionality itself. The next one is around resources. Resources is, like I said, a concept, a representation of the Lync features in the form of an object object view for you. A resource itself consists of a resource state, which is represented in terms of properties, and a link to all the related resources that are available to you. So like we said, we had an example of, say, me presence linked to the call forwarding settings, and an embedded resource which may be sent to you at runtime for scenarios where it makes sense to actually embed the resource itself along with the main resource. This is a pictorial view of how a resource would look like. So we have the resource state represented by ordinary JSON properties, which could be like integer, array, or string value, or a bool. And then there are links, which are links to other resources. Each resource actually has an association with a rel, which talks about what type of resource it is. So if it's a communication resource, then the rel would be communication. If it's a me resource, then the rel would be me, so that you can easily identify that resource. And the embedded resources are, again, a list of all the resources that are sent as part of the same resource. Similar to the whole concept of not making assumptions about the feature set, you should also not make any assumption about a resource being always sent as a link or always sent as an embedded. This is something which we are also learning on our side. So as we look at different scenarios, it may make sense for us to send something as an embedded resource in the future or send it as a link instead, depending upon what the scenario that we want to enable and what optimizations we want to do in the future. The payload formats, we support both JSON and XML payload format in the request response. And we also have the concept of both required and optional parameters. If you do not send a required parameter, what you would receive is a failure in terms of a bad request and a parameter validation failure. We'll also send you the list of parameters that were expected to be sent as part of the required list and you did not send, so you'll have all that information. In addition, you would also need to handle the put request for conflicts or any type of server upgrades. What this means is that when you're doing an update operation for, say, a certain resource, for example, you're updating your phone information, then it's possible that two updates are happening at the same time. So as part of that update request, we actually ask you to first download and get the latest view of that resource itself before sending your put or an update on that particular resource, and include all the properties that you got from the server along with a header called if match. if match header, which will basically check the ETAG version of the version that you have on your client side, the view that you have with the server version, and see if it, for example, got updated while you got this request response, then it would say return saying that this condition failed, and as a result, your update did not succeed. So it basically handles for conflicts. Similarly, there is a handling for upgrade scenarios, which, like I said, you have to read all the properties and send all the properties back. This is basically to ensure that if the server has gone through upgrades, and we have added more properties, then the clients do not unintentionally override some of the new properties. So you as a developer are expected to even send back the properties that are unknown to you, and we have validation around it to make sure that you do that in your programming.
And this makes total sense once you start understanding that on average now the people carry multiple endpoints, right? So they have their Lync client running on their desktop, they have mobile device 1, mobile device 2.
Yes.
So there's a lot of endpoints that need to be synced with that server. So that's why it's so important to actually have that constant match being made.
Yeah. Query parameters, so we support query parameters in the API, and depending upon the scenario, resource, and the resource, these are supported for some operations. And the client should always ensure that it preserves these query parameters that the server sends, and you do not manipulate it in any way. So, and we also say that you do not do any kind of string manipulation when you're adding your query parameters. Instead, you use a proper URL parser. And Post supports both input in terms of query parameters as well as sending your information as part of the body, which we saw in the hello from browser example. Get only supports sending query parameters as the input mechanism. Operation resource. So this is the concept which we actually saw in one of our demos, which is you started your IAM invitation, but the events and the updates were happening in the background, and you got this asynchronous update later on. Operation resource is a concept that we introduce for these long-running scenarios or the actions that you take. And the way they are identified is by providing this operation ID, which the client provides, so that you identify any type of state updates that are coming to you through the event channel at a later point of time. Caching. So as a client, you need to make sure that you maintain an app level cache so that you do not refetch the same resource which are like static in nature. For example, the application resource. Through the lifetime of an application, it shouldn't change, or the me resource. These are static in nature, so they generally should not change. The one way a server notifies you of any changes that are happening on the resources themselves is by sending updates to you on the event channel. And you should look at those updates on the event channel to update your cache, to mark the cache as dirty if you got a link saying that this resource has changed, or if you got a resource itself as part of the event channel in the form of embedded resource, then you can update your cache with that information. So you should always keep track of the events, but at the same time, maintain a cache so that you optimize on the CPU utilization on your side, as well as minimize the number of round trips you make to go retrieve the same set of resources again and again. Batching is a concept that allows us to combine multiple requests. So as a client, you may want to restrict, and in fact, some browsers also restrict the number of outstanding requests that you can have at any given time. So one way to handle that scenario would be that if you, for example, have a search query that returned you multiple results, and you want to go fetch contact information for each of them, or download the presence information or the subject title type of information for them. In that case, you have this list of 30, 20 users, and you want to send it as, instead of sending multiple requests for each of these users, you can batch them up in one request and send it off to the server in the form of a post to the batch resource. And each of these requests within a batch is separated by a MIME type. So this basic batch is nothing but a multi-part MIME. And it is processed on the server, and only once all the requests are handled, that's when you get the response. So the response comes in one shot. And that's the reason why you should be cognizant of which scenarios you want to combine and send in the form of a batch versus which scenarios you don't. For example, for search, it makes total sense to batch these things. However, if you also had an outgoing IM invite, you probably do not want to batch that request because you want to know about that request immediately, like how it's proceeding. So, errors. This is one of the last topics. The errors are, at the high level, they are represented in terms of HTTP 4XX or 5XX errors. These are mainly into two types. One is the synchronous errors, which you are familiar with in terms of sending a request and you get a response, which could be a failure. It has a status code, say 500 service page server failure. And in addition, there is a concept called asynchronous error, and this is primarily introduced to handle our operation resource type scenarios, which are long running and could fail at a later point of time. So when you initially started your request was successful, like the operation resource got created. But at a later point of time, the messaging invitation that you were sending failed because the remote party was unavailable or you could not reach them. That type of failure you would actually receive in the event channel. And that's what is called, forms the asynchronous failure. So you should be aware of both the asynchronous failures as well as there is a concept called asynchronous information. These are really not failure, but these are examples like expected failures. These could be like I was set to DND and that's why I did not accept your call. So that's really not a failure, it's an expected information type of a scenario. The response body itself consists of a code, which is the only required information that will be sent to you. And subcode is extra information about that particular error. The example could be bad request could be a code, and parameter validation failure would be the subcode which tells you that why the request was bad. And message is a user-friendly message that we send. You are free to show that message to your users directly within your app if it makes sense. And the link is a link to more information for errors. In some cases you may have them, some cases you may not. And parameters is again with the bad request example, we also send you the list of parameters that fail to meet that criterion. And debug information is basically extra information that is available to you. And you shouldn't take any programmatic dependency on that information, but it's helpful for any type of troubleshooting scenarios. And with that, we basically come to the last slide, which talks about the summary of what we already covered. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I'll be happy to answer.
Yeah, and this was all a lot of detail, right? You have to understand that starting with this API is actually relatively easy because of those helper libraries.
Yes, yeah.
So a lot of that abstraction that we are just talking about is just to better understand what actually goes over the wire. So you can literally parse every message that goes there from whatever device that you have, and you can see, oh yeah, that was that part and that was that part. So, but the helper libraries abstract a lot of that away, and you can just very easily integrate essentially our functionality in your app.
Yeah, and if there is one thing you want to take away is remember that usiva.lync.com, it's your one-stop shop for all the information related to Usiva.
Any questions?
So a lot of stuff we've covered here is, of course, from a web development perspective, but are you able to inject as part of the listener, someone sending something from a Lync client to initiate a call control with this, or say someone calling into dial-in conferencing, Lync conferencing, and being able to intercept that and make a control meeting, make other outbound calls, PSP and whatever?
So just for the recording, repeat the question. If I understand your question correctly, is whether you actually can get more, can you get different information, or can you actually programmatically control through this API more than essentially what is the user or the user representation?
Well, not just from hey, I've got to log into a web page and initiate everything, initially from this, but be able to, sit as a listener waiting for someone to send an IM to specific, IM address, reproducing like a help desk software or
Yep.
response about doing a call control.
Yeah, and
You,
so
yeah, go ahead.
well, maybe I give the marketing answer, you give the detailed answer. So if you want to essentially create some listener and essentially be some app or some instance that essentially starts trying to intercept or to listen to stuff that's going on, the API is actually not designed to be that at this point in time. This API is essentially just a representation of an end-user endpoint. And of course, there is, in the UC managed API, there's a lot more possible in richness as an application and not as an end user. That currently is not abstracted away yet in this RESTful API. With that, I also hinted that we are actively working on that. We are literally preparing our whole server to essentially be a RESTful API.
Yes.
Is there any integration with SMS? No.
No, not at this point. We don't have any.
It is something that actually, so if you are aware that we essentially, we are now, Skype and Lync are coming together. In Skype, SMS is an important functionality, so I can expect that over time, those functionalities will actually appear as well in the overall service that we are operating. Any other questions? Then we would like to thank you.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us today.
It was a 400 level,
Thanks.
so thanks for staying with us.